In 2023, a writer named Valentina Garza, someone who had actually worked on hit shows people had genuinely heard of, posted a photo online of a residual check she'd received for 2 episodes of a popular streaming series. One check was for 1 cent, the other was for 2 cents. 3 cents total for work that, a decade earlier, under the old broadcast model, could have quietly paid that same writer's bills for years, simply by reairing in reruns and syndication over and over across the country. That 3-cent check went viral for a reason. It captured, in the smallest, most absurd possible way, something enormous that's been happening underneath the entire streaming comedy boom, mostly invisible to anyone just watching from their couch. We've gotten used to hearing that streaming saved television, gave creators more freedom, let comedy get weirder, sharper, more ambitious. All of that is at least partly true, but there's a cost buried underneath that story, one that doesn't show up on your monthly subscription bill, and it's been quietly reshaping who gets to make comedy, how long a show is allowed to exist, and whether the people actually writing your favorite streaming sitcom can afford to keep doing the job at all. And here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. The old system, reruns, syndication, the stuff that always got treated like a boring rerun on basic cable, that stuff was actually the financial engine that let television comedy survive as a stable career for decades. Streaming didn't just change where you watch comedy, it quietly broke the machine that used to pay for it. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what that 3-cent check represents, why so many streaming comedies keep disappearing after 1 or 2 seasons no matter how good they are, and why an entire generation of comedy writers went on strike specifically over a math problem most viewers never even knew existed. Let's start with the old system, because you can't understand what broke without understanding what it replaced. For most of television history, a writer or actor's income from a hit sitcom didn't stop the moment the original episode aired. It kept going, sometimes for decades, through syndication, the practice of licensing already aired episodes to air again and again, on different channels, in different cities, at different times of day. Every single time an old episode reran, the people who wrote and performed in it received a payment called a residual. For a genuinely popular sitcom, one that ran for years and accumulated 100 or more episodes, those residual payments from syndication could add up to a stable, ongoing income stream that supported writers and actors for the rest of their careers, long after the original show had stopped filming new episodes. This wasn't a minor detail of the business. It was the entire financial safety net the profession was built around. A writer might work steadily for a few years on a hit show, then quiet periods without new work, but the syndication checks from that earlier hit kept arriving anyway, smoothing out the boom and bust reality of freelance creative work. Streaming platforms broke that model almost entirely, and they did it quietly enough that most viewers never noticed the shift happening. Instead of licensing already aired episodes for reruns, streaming platforms mostly pay a flat, upfront fee for the work, and residual payments for streaming reuse, when they exist at all, are calculated on a completely different formula. One the Writers Guild of America has argued for years pays out a small fraction of what the old syndication model provided. According to the Guild's own data, streaming residuals actually grew rapidly for a while, nearly 40% a year between 2020 and 2023, as more and more production shifted onto these platforms. But even that growth has slowed dramatically since, and in 2025, for the first time ever, total streaming residual payments to writers actually declined year over year, even as the volume of streaming content kept climbing. The 3-cent check wasn't a fluke or a glitch, it was the new math, working exactly as designed. This exact issue became one of the central flashpoints of the 2023 Writers Guild strike, a 147-day work stoppage that shut down scripted television production across the entire industry. Writers weren't just asking for more money in the abstract. They were pointing directly at a structural problem. According to the Guild, roughly half of all working television writers were now employed primarily in streaming, a business model that had quietly eliminated the long-term residual income the profession had relied on for generations, without ever really replacing it with something equivalent. There's a second, related cost that emerged directly out of this same streaming-era math, one that reshaped not just how writers get paid, but how long they even get to keep their jobs on any given show, something the industry started calling the mini-room. Under the traditional broadcast model, a comedy writer's room typically stayed staffed, and employed across an entire production season, sometimes for many months at a stretch, giving writers steady work, health benefits tied to accumulated weeks of employment, and enough job security to actually build a career. Streaming platforms, chasing lower costs and faster turnaround, increasingly began hiring small teams of writers for extremely short bursts, sometimes as brief as 2.5 to 10 weeks, just long enough to break a season's worth of story before letting most of those writers go. Often before the show had even started filming, the Writers Guild specifically identified this practice as one of its top demands during the 2023 strike, arguing that mini-rooms didn't just reduce individual paychecks, they actively prevented writers from accumulating enough working weeks to qualify for guild health insurance and pension benefits in the first place, quietly pushing an entire generation of comedy writers toward genuine financial precarity, even while working steadily inside a booming industry. So writers were getting paid less per project, losing the long-term residual safety net that used to smooth out lean years, and increasingly being hired in short, disconnected bursts rather than sustained employment. But there's a third cost sitting on top of all of this, one that's arguably more visible to you as a viewer than any of the financial mechanics happening behind the scenes. Streaming comedies simply don't get to exist for very long anymore. According to industry analytics firm Parrot Analytics, the average length of a broadcast television season dropped from just over 16 episodes in 2018 to under 12 by the middle of 2024. Streaming seasons shrank too, from roughly 11 episodes down to about 9 over that same stretch. Shows with more than 20 episodes in a season, once the industry standard for a hit sitcom, had become a genuine rarity by 2023, making up less than 5% of scripted American television, down from nearly 1 in 5 shows just 5 years earlier. That contraction accelerated dramatically after 2022, in what industry analysts now openly refer to as the peak TV correction, the moment the entire streaming industry's aggressive, subscriber-chasing content spending finally hit a wall. Scripted comedy premieres dropped by roughly 30% in a single year between 2022 and 2023, according to analytics firm Ampere. Netflix alone cut its total releases from over 100 new seasons in 2022 down to just 68 the following year. And once a streaming comedy did get made, its odds of actually surviving past a single season got measurably worse too. A 2025 industry analysis found cancellation rates soaring across almost every major streaming platform for shows that debuted in 2023, with services like Disney+, Apple TV+, and Paramount Plus canceling more than 40% of their new original series entirely. Think about what that actually means for comedy specifically, as a format. Sitcoms have always depended on time to fully work. Character relationships deepen across seasons. Running jokes and callbacks only land once an audience has spent enough time inside a show's specific rhythm to recognize them. Ensemble chemistry, the thing that turns a decent comedy into a genuinely beloved one, often takes a full season or two to actually click into place. The old broadcast model, whatever its flaws, gave shows enough room and enough episodes to find that chemistry, because a mediocre first season didn't necessarily mean instant cancellation. The streaming model increasingly doesn't offer that same grace period. A shorter season, evaluated almost immediately by an algorithm measuring completion rates and viewership decay, gives a young comedy dramatically less runway to become the show it might have eventually grown into. There's a cost sitting on the other side of the ledger too, one that seems to contradict everything else in this story until you look closer. Even as writers' rooms shrank and residuals collapsed, the actual price of producing a single episode of prestige streaming comedy climbed dramatically. Shows built with cinematic ambitions, real location shooting, film-trained cinematographers, elaborate production design cost significantly more per episode than a traditional multi-camera sitcom filmed in a single studio over the course of one night. That combination is genuinely strange when you say it out loud. Streaming comedies have often become more expensive to produce per episode, while the people writing and sustaining them have simultaneously become less financially secure than they were a decade earlier. The money didn't disappear from the system. It simply moved away from long-term residuals spread across a large writing staff and toward concentrated, upfront production budgets spent on a much smaller handful of episodes. The strike also surfaced a related fear that's arguably even more consequential for the profession's future than any single pay dispute: artificial intelligence. Writers specifically demanded strict, enforceable limits on generative AI being used to draft or rewrite scripts, worried, reasonably, that a studio facing already thin margins might eventually try to use AI tools to shrink writers' rooms even further, or to generate rough drafts that a smaller, cheaper team of humans would simply polish rather than originate. The final agreement that ended the strike included real protections on this front, but the underlying anxiety that an industry already squeezing writers financially might reach for automation as the next cost-cutting lever hasn't gone away just because the picket lines did. Streaming's international reach adds one more wrinkle worth understanding, because it's part of why these platforms have historically resisted paying residuals the way broadcast networks used to. A hit broadcast sitcom's syndication value came largely from repeated domestic reruns, a relatively easy thing to measure and pay out against. A streaming show, by contrast, releases simultaneously to subscribers in dozens of countries at once, and untangling exactly how much of a platform's overall subscriber value any single comedy actually contributed is a far murkier calculation. One, streaming platforms have historically had enormous financial incentive to calculate conservatively. Part of the 2023 strike agreement specifically introduced a new formula accounting for international subscribers, projected to boost certain streaming residual payments by roughly 21%. It's real progress. It's also, worth noting, still nowhere close to what a genuinely successful show could have generated for its writers under the old syndication model. There's an uncomfortable irony sitting at the center of all of this, one worth sitting with directly. Streaming was originally sold both to audiences and to the creative community as a kind of liberation, freedom from the rigid 22-episode broadcast grind, freedom from network notes demanding broader jokes for a mass audience, freedom to make something stranger, more specific, more purely creative, and in some very real ways, that promise, delivered. Shows that never could have existed on a traditional network schedule found homes on streaming platforms, telling sharper, more idiosyncratic stories than broadcast comedy had allowed in decades. But that creative freedom arrived bundled with a quieter trade, one the people actually making the comedy absorbed almost entirely on their own: less job security, a collapsed long-term income structure that used to function as an entire career's retirement plan, dramatically shorter windows for any individual show to find its footing before facing cancellation. The audience mostly experienced streaming's arrival as an upgrade, more variety, more control over when and how to watch. The people writing the jokes experienced it as something closer to a quiet demolition of the exact financial infrastructure that had made a comedy writing career sustainable in the first place. You don't have to look far to find a concrete example of exactly this pattern playing out. Hulu's Mid-Century Modern, a comedy that arrived to real critical warmth, was quietly canceled after a single season in 2025, one entry in a much longer list of streaming sitcoms that got a genuine shot at an audience, generated real goodwill, and still didn't survive long enough to become anything more than a single short burst of episodes. It's a pattern that's become common enough across the industry that trade publications now track it as a routine category of story, rather than a surprising exception worth a headline of its own. So the next time you finish a genuinely great streaming comedy, only to discover a few months later that it's been quietly canceled after a single short season, or you notice a beloved show's writer's room somehow feels thinner and faster moving than the sprawling ensembles that used to write your childhood favorites, you'll understand what you're actually seeing. It isn't just changing taste, or an algorithm making a cold, data-driven call. It's the visible tip of a much larger financial restructuring, one that quietly rewired an entire profession, one 3-cent residual check at a time. Residual check at a time. Residual